Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel and today I am going to be talking about the Between Earth and Sky trilogy by Rebecca Roanhorse. So I just finished reading the third and final book in this trilogy, Mirrored Heavens, and I decided instead of just like doing a little review recap of that book alone, because it's the third and final book in a trilogy, I thought it might be better to just sort of talk more broadly about this trilogy as a whole and my thoughts and feelings on it. So I'm going to try and keep this spoiler free. So if you haven't read it, you should be able to watch this whole video without learning about any really super significant plot points from late in the series. But I am going to talk a little bit about my feelings about like how it ends, just in a non-spoilery way. So that's what we're gonna do today. So yeah, the Between Earth and Sky trilogy by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is far from the first my first experience with Rebecca Roanhorse. I've read several of her other novels. I've read both of her novels. I believe that series is called The Sixth World. And it's the first one is, I believe, Trail of Lightning, and the second one is Storm of Locusts. I've read those. I have read her standalone historical fantasy novel, Tread of Angels, which I also really liked. And I've read her Star Wars novel, Star Wars Rise, I believe it was called Resistance Reborn. So yeah, I've read, clearly Roanhorse is an author that have come back to again and again. And so I do really like her writing. I appreciate how skilled she is at, she can change the sort of the register of her writing quite easily depending on what she's writing about or which character she's writing for. Obviously, like, her Sixth World series is more of a sort of gritty, kind of dystopian, vaguely cli-fi fantasy series that's more contemporary and has a lot more contemporary nomenclature in it. Obviously, Star Wars is Star Wars and has its own kind of thing. Tread of Angels is historical fantasy, which is in almost a totally different register from her Sixth World series. And this, Between Earth and Sky, is kind of a hybrid secondary world epic fantasy series, but it has different characters who often speak in very different registers from each other. Some of them speak in a more sort of high, archaic kind of style, and some of them speak in a much more contemporary kind of way, a slangy kind of way. And it works, for me, it works quite well. It makes sense within the context of the story, how and why these different characters speak in different ways. Generally speaking, I find Roanhorse to be very readable. I can usually fly, all of her books I've been able to fly through really quickly. I just read, so Mirrored Heavens, my copy of Mirrored Heavens is just shy of 600 pages. I read it in like 4 days. I got it read really, really fast. So like, it doesn't take me long to get through her writing at all. It's to me, it flows very well. It's very easy to read. So I really do appreciate Roanhorse's writing, and she's definitely an author that I have come back to again and again, and will continue to come back to in the future as she writes more. I know the only one I know for sure that she's writing right now is she's working on another Star Wars novel. Yeah, so I mean, I'll definitely be reading that one. But otherwise, yeah, anything that she writes in future, I'm pretty much on board for. Now to get into more of the specifics of Between Earth and Sky, this trilogy, as I said, is a secondary world kind of epic fantasy. It's based, I would say, loosely on like Mesoamerican culture. It has that kind of flavor to it. The setting has that kind of flavor to it, and the different cultures and some of the words that you encounter have some of that flavor to it. Um, we have, it's also multi POV, so we have a number of different POV characters that we're following, which is something that I like. I generally like that in my epic fantasy, my secondary world fantasy. I like a good multi POV story. So this was very much up my alley. I love secondary world fantasies that are like based on cultures and ideas that are not European, right? It's always fun to encounter those, and of course the multi POV aspect of it was a big appeal to me as well. So we have a number of main characters in this story. It's kind of hard to talk about the plot of this because it is so complicated. There's a lot of political and magical and godly maneuvering going on in this plot over the course of these 3 books. But generally speaking, we're following, I don't know, maybe 4-ish main characters. We have Ziala, who's a Teak. She's an exile from her people. The Teak are a very isolationist culture of only women who live on these islands out in the ocean, and they're very closely connected to the ocean. They worship the ocean as their mother, and she's an exile from her people for some bad things that she did. And so she is out in the world. She is out for herself at the beginning of the story. She is a sailor, possibly, a pirate, though she might deny that personally, that she's a pirate. She might say, well, I'm a merchant sea captain. Whether that's legitimate or not is kind of beside the point. She's given a job to transport a young man who is blind, and that is an important point. That is a relatively significant plot point, the fact that he's blind, to this city up this river called Tova. This young man, Serapio, is a man who has been born and raised for one singular purpose. He is to be the avatar of the crow god, and he is a tool of vengeance against the priests who slaughtered his mother's people decades ago. He's been raised in complete isolation solely for this purpose, and as Ziala and travels with Serapio, they become closer to each other. She learns more about who he is, he learns more about who she is, and her fate becomes kind of intertwined with his. He's very much a child who feels bound, a person who feels bound by fate, destiny, prophecy. He doesn't necessarily see himself as a person with any kind of agency. We also have another main character in Tova called Narampa, and she is Naranpa? I don't know. She is the sun priest, so she's the head of this religious order that executed the massacre several decades ago, though she was not alive at the time. She was, if she was alive, she was a very, very young child. But she is the sun priest. She's the head of this order. She has a lot of very new ideas about what to do with the priesthood and where to take the priesthood. She's very idealistic and naive. She's also, however, she also faces a lot of opposition because she is not one of she does not come from one of the great families of Tova, right? She is a child of what's known as the Maw, which is basically the slums of Tova. She comes from nothing, and she worked her way up basically with her own sort of intelligence and guile, and she made her way up to the top of this chain, but a lot of people oppose her. And she is also sort of, again, she's sort of this symbolic, hated mortal enemy of Serapio, and he's coming to basically kill her. We also have like a character called Okoa, and he is a member of one of these clans of Tova. He's a member of the Carrion Crow clan, of which Serapio is the avatar of their god. And this is the clan against which this massacre was committed. And he is the son of the matron of the clan, the head of the clan. And he is away at school when his mother suddenly dies. And this is assumed to be and put about that it was a suicide, but Okoa receives correspondence that indicates that his mother's death was perhaps in fact a murder, and he decides that he is duty bound to return to Tova and try and figure out what's going on here. And he sort of finds himself unwillingly caught up in this very complex political situation. And throughout this land, we have a treaty that has existed for 300 years that has outlawed the use of magic. And there are numerous other people in some of these places who are sort of conspiring in various ways to break this treaty, to bring the supremacy of magic back to the world, and to instigate fights between more wars, not only on land, not only, in the world, but also among the gods themselves. So there's lots of different layers to this story. There's lots of political machinations going on. And again, there's things like prophecy and fate and destiny going on. There's lots of dark magic happening sort of in the sidelines. There's characters who maybe don't believe in magic at all, like Naranpa and the other members of this priesthood are very sort of anti-magic. They're the ones who enforce the treaty that outlaws magic. So they're very much about reason and logic and science and things like that. And she does not believe in magic in the slightest, despite the fact that she's a priest, right? That she's a sort of a representative in the world of a god. She doesn't really believe in any of the supernatural nonsense. But of course, she sort of has to gradually grapple with the fact that it does exist and that it may, in fact, be part of her life and part of her destiny to start to wield some of this. So there's a lot of stuff like that going on. There are definitely giant flying birds, which is cool. I like that. Flying mounts of any kind, because again, the Carrion Crow clan, they fly around on giant crows. The other three clans of Tova, Golden Eagle, Winged Serpent, and Water Strider, also get around on giant animals. They're their namesakes. And that's super cool. A nice, a fun addition to the whole thing. But yeah, and there's all different kinds of magic as well in this story. Needless to say, this is a really fun and engaging kind of story. It also deals with some interesting themes of agency. One of my sort of favorite kind of go-to tropes in fantasy and just storytelling in general that goes back almost as long as humans have been telling stories is this sort of struggle between human free will and fate or destiny or prophecy, and like that tension between the two of those. Are we simply pawns of greater powers? Is there some greater fate or destiny for everybody and we're just kind of along for the ride? To what extent can we affect the outcome? Can we change our own fate? Can we exercise agency and free will and change the way things are quote unquote supposed to happen? And if so, how does that play out? That's a really big, interesting question that sort of gets asked in this series and is dealt with in some ways, I think, some interesting ways that I don't always see happen. So I enjoyed a lot of that. I think the characters generally are pretty compelling. I wasn't really, like, there was never a point where it would switch to a particular character's POV and I would be like, I don't really want this POV. I want to go back to the others. They're all pretty equally interesting to me, I think. Sometimes Okoa was a little bit... I didn't always necessarily care too much for Okoa's whole deal. He's sort of a character who is kind of torn between his loyalties, and he never knows quite where he stands with anyone, and he's never sure of what he should believe or who he should be following. And it's clear that he is very much a follower. He's definitely not a leader, which on one hand is kind of interesting, because a lot of times, these stories focus on people who are very much sort of A personalities and very much like leader type characters. And Okoa is very much not. Like, he's the person who, like, he wants to be able to place his loyalty with one person or idea or whatever, and then just sort of have, and then just sort of be told what to do. That's kind of the role that he was born to some extent, and that he trained for, and so he's always kind of struggling with that, which it sometimes is interesting, and other times I'm like, you just gotta stop being so wishy-washy, man. Just stop being so wishy-washy, and just figure out figure out where your loyalties lie, and just stick with it. So that's a little strange at times. But yeah, and the world building is great. I would say, um, to me, it felt like the second book in this series, Fevered Star, was quite short. And while there were definitely some things that happened in it that I liked, a lot of Fevered Star felt like sort of just table setting. It felt like a lot of Fevered Star just felt like we got to shuffle these characters around so that they're in the right places for the big finale. That's what a lot of Fevered Star felt like. So Fevered Star, I think, for me, is probably the weakest of this trilogy, and I almost feel like with a little bit of more like guided editing, it could maybe even have been a duology, because again, Fevered Star is pretty short, especially compared to the other two. It probably could have been pared down enough so that it could have been like a duology instead of a trilogy, maybe, but it definitely felt like Fevered Star needed a little more padding. That might be a COVID thing. I don't know if Fevered Star was around COVID or if it was being written around COVID. I don't know. Regardless, it felt a little bit like there wasn't as much substance to it. But otherwise, like, this is a pretty strong trilogy. I would say overall, like, this trilogy is probably 4 stars. A couple of the characters had arcs that felt to me that they ended kind of abruptly and unsatisfyingly. Like, some of the characters, it seemed, again, I don't want to go into too much detail for fear of being accused of spoiling things. But a couple of the characters definitely is like, okay, well, I'm not sure where this is going, but I'm interested to see where it goes. And then they just kind of end abruptly, and I'm like, I was sitting there thinking, is that it? That's really it? That's all? That's the end of the arc? That's where they're gonna end up? I'm not sure how I feel about that with a couple of the characters. Though, like, that bit of it doesn't necessarily bother me as long as the journey itself is interesting and thought-provoking, which it generally was. So yeah, I think, again, overall, I think this trilogy is probably a 4-star-ish. It's fun, it's solid, it's maybe not like the the most emotionally engaging thing I've ever experienced, but Roanhorse, for me, again, Roanhorse is one of those authors that I know I can go to pretty much at any time, and I'm going to have a good time with whatever it is that she's written. She's a pretty solid bet for me every time, and this trilogy was no exception. I definitely thoroughly enjoyed my time with it, and yeah, I'm interested in where she goes in the future. I follow Rebecca Roanhorse's career with great interest. She's definitely one of my faves, one of my, some people call them auto-buy authors. I don't know that she's an auto-buy author. I don't know that I have very many auto-buy authors, but she's definitely an auto-read author. Like, I'm gonna read whatever she comes up with. Whether I buy it or get it from the library, kind of up in the air, but definitely a fun time. So yeah, that is my review and my thoughts on Between Earth and Sky trilogy by Rebecca Roanhorse. The titles in this trilogy are Black Sun, Fevered Star, and Mirrored Heavens, which I believe just came out like last year, so pretty recent. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this trilogy? Did you like it? Do you like Rebecca Roanhorse? What else by Rebecca Roanhorse are you interested in reading? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more thoughts on books. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.